So an unskilled attacker attempting to do anything nowadays is able to be much more powerful than they were with that in a pre-AI era.
Welcome to Threat Vector, the Palo Alto Network's podcast, where we discuss pressing cybersecurity threats and resilience and uncover insights into the latest industry trends. I'm your host, David Moulton, Director of Thought Leadership. Today, I'm speaking to Ryan Barger, Director of Offensive Security Services, about how they're using AI. Here's our conversation. Ryan Barger, welcome to Threat Vector. Excited to have you here.
Likewise, excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Ryan, talk to me a little bit about what you do at Unit 42.
Sure. So I am the Director of Offensive Security Services at Unit 42. So at the end of the day, we have a team of people who are specialized at emulating adversarial skill sets. So basically using the same techniques that attackers do. And they do so in order to try and identify vulnerabilities inside of a network and move through a network and maybe exercise blue teams, a myriad of things, a myriad of benefits to our team, all by using the same techniques wielded by bad guys.
Ryan, I think this is a really interesting space, and I'm curious, how did you get into, or what got you interested in offensive security?
So I started out as a developer, and somewhere along the ways, I was recruited into static code analysis. So if you're not familiar with that, basically I received millions of lines of source code when was put into a dark room, source code that wasn't mine, it was someone else's, and had to go find all the bugs and flaws inside that source code. Can I tell you something, David? That was my happy place. Like, I loved
Yeah.
static code analysis. I did it for many years. If you were to ask me what can I do tomorrow that would make me happy, that would be it. So in doing so and constantly being exposed to different developer mistakes made inside of a myriad of different applications every single day, I started to realize, you start to be able to see how things are working on the back end of all the things that you're working on. Eventually, I found myself, and I think you might sympathize with this, where I was the subject matter expert in that field. The Navy had appointed me as a subject matter expert for a specific command, and I was like overseeing tons of test events, but my mentors had all moved on to other things. And so one of my mentors had recruited me into offensive security. And so I went and joined a DoD cyber red team to, start taking that ethical side and also twisting it to go from just, I don't know how to find the vulnerabilities, but also as creating exploits for them to move through a network. Really exciting stuff.
It sounds like it. So today we're going to talk about AI, automation, and OffSec. Maybe we'll get into deepfakes and some of your thoughts on where offensive security should be focusing, where it's going. I'm excited for the conversation. Let's get right into it. In offensive security, how is AI being leveraged to automate and enhance tasks that were previously manual or time-consuming?
It's interesting. A lot of what offensive security is manually grinding through dead ends until, after 99% of your dead ends, you finally find that one leeway that leads you further into an attack. So what we're doing with using AI is trying to help more quickly filter through those potential dead ends. So let me give you some examples. Areas where we're using it is inside of OSINT analysis, as we're assessing open source information just sitting on the internet, as we're doing payload development and establishing new evasion techniques to get around defensive products. We're also using it to help establish and build our infrastructure, but that's just a small snippet of things. Additionally, from the overall management of an operation in offensive security for things like report rating and all of the things that go along with just doing a test event, we're trying to find a way to reduce that manual grind that is hacking and focus in on the areas that are really useful and increase efficiency.
Ryan, for listeners that haven't heard the term offensive security, can you define that?
Absolutely. So at its crux, right, you could just boil it down and say it's hacking, right? It's ethical hacking. So I'm going to use the exact same techniques that an adversary uses to attempt to identify vulnerabilities and move through an environment, usually after a specific set of objectives, right? So that can range from vishing, right? Making phone calls into organizations trying to social engineer access, all the way down to pivoting through an organization's domain, trying to get access to a specific system that is specified by the customer to be their golden, their crown jewels, right? So we move through a network and try and use the exact same techniques as an adversary to try and assess overall cyber risk. That's really the single sentence description. At the end of the day, I like to say that my mission objective is not just to emulate the adversary, but to help the CISO sleep at night. Right? CISOs are they're aware that there's a risk in their network somewhere, or at least they think there is. They send us after that perceived risk. We use all the techniques that a bad guy can use, and we tell them at the end, go, yeah, that is a valid risk, and here's some recommended remediations. Or otherwise, we tell them, no, actually, there's sufficient safeguards there to prevent it, and then they can sleep at night.
I love it. So, ethical hacker and not quite the therapist for the CISO, but in a sense, taking their nightmares away. How about OSINT? That's a term that you've used. I've heard it before, but I want to make sure that our audience is aware of what OSINT is.
Sure. Open source intelligence. Basically, when I'm an attacker moving after an organization, before I actually go and start giving away the fact that I'm targeting an organization, I want to start looking at all the information that pre-exists out there on the internet about that. So, looking up, domain name records, going through LinkedIn profiles, and trying to figure out information about their employees, recent job postings. The most recent way with which we combined OSINT and AI has been we go through an organization's LinkedIn page. We identify all of the people affiliated with an organization along with all their accompanying details. So, for example, Jane Doe went to college at the University of Pennsylvania, right? And now we take that information and we correlate it with massive troves of breach information. So, in other words, people who lost their Yahoo accounts in 2012, those passwords and all that stuff, we're going through that with all the information we know about an organization. So, we'll figure out that we'll go and look through Jane Doe's name. There will be a million records for Jane Doe, but we'll correlate that to addresses using AI that are associated with the University of Pennsylvania or other accounts associated with the University of Pennsylvania, or maybe phone numbers with the right zip code that start to narrow it down and increase the fidelity of valid possible results. And then now we've learned more about Jane Doe. We've learned about her potential password usage history. Maybe her password was, Nana's Boys 1. And now we know we can try Nana's Boys 1, 2, or 3, right? As we try and move through an organization. So pilfering through massive troves of data and trying to figure out which ones are most likely valid is something we're doing with AI and OSINT.
And that data was available. Sometimes those digital bits, we're giving them away. We're publishing them actively, whether part of our social media presence, our professional social presence, press, or websites. And you're collecting that data. And because of the speed and scale that AI can achieve, finding those relationships such that you're not looking through an infinite number of Jane Doe records, but very specific to a target that you would like to include in your ethical hacking, such that you can get to a point where you can say, this is a weakness that is out there and you need to take a mitigation uh, as a part of a recommendation to a CISO.
100%. It's something we use to try and get that initial access in an organization. We take the million Jane Doe records and turn them into a potential, you know, 50, and then use those to try and get into an organization for initial access.
Got it. So, in terms of payload development, how does AI assist in creating new methods to evade endpoint detection or EDR systems? And do you have a good example for the audience?
Absolutely. So I think we could say payload development as a predecessor to this. One of the things that AI is doing is it's leveling up the unskilled attacker, right? So an unskilled attacker attempting to do anything nowadays is able to be much more powerful than they were with that in a pre-AI era. So let's take that foundation and move into the concept of payload development. When you're developing a payload to go into a network, you usually start from a pre-existing repository on GitHub, et cetera, that does something valuable that you need to do. You download that. The first thing you're trying to do is get past static signatures of EDR products. So you have to change the code in a way that an EDR looks at the static file and says, this is not malicious. It's not affiliated with that GitHub repo that we all know is malicious, right? So often that's easy. It's removing keywords like Mimikatz and all that stuff that are very highly affiliated with malicious files. But sometimes it gets down into a very specific way that a certain DLL, that's a rare DLL in the Windows library that's being called. It just the usage of that library is decreasing the reputation of that file, and as a result, triggering it as malicious. And that's the type of static signature that's where it takes a really skilled attacker to start manipulating. Now, I actually ran into this right around the beginning of the AI boom, and I had to find a way to do what was a very complex set of logic without using a specific DLL that Windows was already using in a payload. So I'm a very senior developer. I've been developing for 20 years. But when you get into trying to use Windows in ways that it's not intended to be used, then it still becomes a difficult process to think through and plan. I just dropped into AI the specific snippet of code and said, I would like to perform this exact same functionality without using this DLL. And Bob's your uncle within seconds. It provided me 2 to 3 unique starting points with which to modify that code, and I successfully evaded signature from a static standpoint, static, file analysis by doing so. So now, look, I've got 20 plus years of software development behind me, so I was able to craft the query to AI, et cetera, in a way that got me a good result, and I was able to interpret the results and tweak the results. But still, I think the level of entry to do that type of technique of creating completely unique payloads is the bar to entry is much lower.
So it sounds like if you're a unskilled attacker, it up levels your game. If you're a very skilled attacker, it speeds up your game.
100% that's accurate. Very accurate.
Yeah, that's frightening, but it also means that on the ethical hacker side, it's speeding up your game so that you can find these things and help harden against those type of attacks.
100% agree.
Ryan, talk to me about some of the other ways that you're using AI in your attacks.
Sure. So it's the same general technique. Before we talked about OSINT analysis, and I was digging through massive troves of information to try and find those unique things to look at that are most likely valuable. It's the same thing when it comes to in the middle of the attack. In the middle of the attack, once you get that initial access and you're moving through a network, it's the same game. You're collecting troves of data and analyzing it. So let me give an example for reconnaissance. We developed a tool that would go through and look at all the files on a specified set of file shares. Now, there's already tools that do similar types of things. In a pre-AI era, we would go out and look for things like p.text or files that contain the word password, etc., to try and nail down files that are perhaps of interest. Now, if we start with that, which already gave us a long list of files to dig through, and we incorporate in analysis of the return data with LLM, we can further hone down what is the actual files that we should run after and go look at to further our attack. Let me give this example. Inside of most of the tools that are digging through a network in an automated fashion looking for files, they're literally looking for things like, is the file called p.text or is it called web.config? Because those are things I want to look at. However, the LLM can look at the greater situation and say, wait a minute, I see that this path is this file is located inside of a default user account on this directory, and I know that file is not meaningful at all. We can even tell the LLM to maybe open up and take a look at the first 100 lines of the file and thereby increase the rating of how quickly we need to look at it. So LLMs are capable of greatly increasing the speed with which we perform our initial reconnaissance and look for what I would call loot as an attacker, things that will help me further my attack.
Ryan, so you've got one example of how you're using AI to speed things up, but there've got to be other creative ways, other things that you're doing. Can you go a little deeper? Talk to our audience about the types of things that maybe they're not thinking about, but they should be.
Sure. Let's, instead of saying about how we move through the network, let's take it and go to something that's a supporting asset to that attack that you sometimes don't think about. So let's say I gain access to a network. Well, I'm not sitting inside the building, actually typing on a keyboard. I've got to get that communication channel out and have a means to pivot into that network from an external resource. Well, I can't, if it's not a high reputation resource, certain firewalls are going to catch me. Um, and as a good guy, I can't do what some of the bad guys get to do, which is just go pop a random website and pivot off of its earned reputation. So what we have to do is we have to go out, we have to procure domains, um, set content on those domains that resemble the domain name and then get it categorized appropriately. Very commonly, we'll try and simulate health based domains or financial domains because those often won't be susceptible to break and inspect rules on networks. But long story short, what we need to do is we need to go set up infrastructure and have it sitting out on the internet waiting to be used for an operation. And the downside to that is a lot of times our operations will go until we intentionally sometimes get caught because our job is to exercise blue, in which case we've now burned the domain, right? XDRs or whatever product is going to see that activity on that domain and decrease its reputation. So we do have to have basically a trove of infrastructure sitting out on the internet ready to be used to pivot into organizations. We're using AI to increase the efficiency with which we can stand up that infrastructure. So if you buy a domain, Joe's Bank or joesnationalbank.com, we now can use AI to establish what is a unique front page with unique content that's relevant to a financial industry. We can create contact us profiles and pictures relevant to employees of the bank. We can establish an entire background that helps to establish fidelity for this. Now, if you're inside of a SOC, you're a network defender, and you see suspicious activity, something gets triggered where you go, hey, there's some weird activity going out to this website, and you go to that website and you start moving around it and it looks like a full-fledged banking website, you're going to say, huh, there's a chance that you may look the other way from my attack, declare it a false positive, say, oh, there must be something else going on there, it looks fine. And so that's what we do. We establish, reputable looking infrastructure to pivot through, and we're using AI to increase the efficiency with which we do that.
It sounds like work that is necessary but boring, and you can turn that over to the robot to set it up. And then you've got this repository of valid, maybe human tricking level content out there ready to deploy at a moment's notice. So that's got to cut down the amount of administration time and and some level just the process of going through and clicking and setting up and deploying contact us pages and about us pages and all those different things that you may go like, I don't really want to do this. I'm a senior developer with 20 years experience. Why am I making fake websites? And yet you need that. So that's an interesting other use of AI that you've got going on. Ryan, let's switch gears and talk about some of the implications of deepfakes. Back in April, I had a chance to talk with our colleagues Billy Hewitt and Tony Hunt about deepfakes in episode 20. And what they talked to me about was really eye opening and a bit frightening with what attackers are doing with deepfakes, what they're able to pull off. You're on the other side, and I'm wondering if you can share your perspective on that topic today.
For sure. From an attacker's perspective, the first thing that we've seen is, they're using AI to help create content for, say, a phishing email, right? Maybe English isn't their first language. And so as a result, they're using these AI engines to help create more authentic looking content that hits the target audience without raising any suspicions due to, grammar issues, etc. Additionally, in the same way that English isn't their first language, perhaps because they're coming from an external attack vector, they might mask an accent by using deepfake capability to kind of increase the reputation of themselves as they're on the phone trying to vish someone and to gain initial access. Now, from an offensive security perspective, we're doing a similar thing, but instead of masking our accent from being a foreign actor, we are instead trying to sometimes masquerade as someone that's already known with inside the organization. So maybe we're trying to convince a help desk person that we are, again, Jane Doe, and we can use live deepfake capability in order to mimic her as long as we've uh, gained access to her audio somewhere else. So, an example of this would be uh, we were approached recently by an organization that wanted us to attempted deepfaked on one of their very very senior executives. Well, as they were a large organization and it's a very senior executive, there was YouTube video of them speaking on Mad Money and all of this stuff. Like there was enough content for us to be able to demonstrate an ability to capture his audio and potentially create a deepfake. And we were going to, as offensive security, our initial thought is always as a hacker, hey, how can I get initial access? Um, but we actually thought for this customer, it might be more interesting to demonstrate a fiscal impact. And in that way, we took this very senior member of the organization and recommended, hey, we can mimic this person and have them try and drive a financial impact in your organization. So, for example, they can post a message inside of the Slack channels that indicates we should disavow association with a competitor or with sell stock, whatever it is that's trying to result in a financial move. That was the theoretical way that we were going to weaponize that attack. So deepfakes definitely provide a lot of vectors with which either offensive security people trying to assess risk or bad guys trying to make a move in the market. Uh, there's a lot of ways that we can employ deepfakes to further the attack effort.
So you've mentioned how threat actors may use deepfakes or the white hat community might use them. Are there other ways that uh, they could potentially incorporate AI?
So, as a white hat community member, right, my job is to be ethical and move through a network without really causing any damage and also staying inside of scope for where I'm assigned to target. I think one of the places that an adversary will use AI in a way I haven't seen it occur yet, but I think the day is coming, is we have not had a worm uh, occur since the AI boom. And I think that the day is inevitably going to come when there is a next big worm that is leveraging local language models to help further its attack.
Ryan, you're mentioning what I think is an AI worm. And if it's a intelligent worm, it can make decisions, maybe strategic decisions. Can you elaborate on how that might impact network security?
Absolutely. So let's first explain the difference between an AI driven worm in theory versus your standard worm. So let's go for one of the last big ones, WannaCry. Pretty much all of them boil down to the same general concept. They're going to land on a machine. They're going to assess one or two binary decisions. Is there a machine next to me with port 445 open? If so, try and pivot. Right? There's bottom line, worms aren't too intelligent. They're able to move and continually and pilfer, but they're very reliant upon a very specific set of things being there in order for them to do so. If you want to talk about intelligent worms, you have to go, back to Stuxnet, where it was looking for very specific boxes to pilfer to. But at the end of the day, as intelligent as that product was, it was still just a series of, binary decisions. Looking, is this here? Is this here? Can I move? Yes or no? And then doing so. Now, what a future worm could theoretically do is, instead of moving just laterally and saying, I'm going to move to the box to my left and the box to my right, it can say, I'm going to look at my overall environment. Okay, I've landed in a domain. I'm going to move up the chain and gain control of the entire domain and then proliferate back down. And that could have a cascading effect, I think, that would result in a very quick spread of that worm. Because as you can imagine, the devices, especially in a remote work environment that we're living in right now, uh, a worm potentially going down and affecting all the devices inside of a network that are connected to a domain, that those devices are also connected to home networks. So now it proliferates out from those vantage points, and so on and so forth. So I think that its ability to make more conscious decisions about moving about doing a creative attack that goes up and then out, versus just trying to pivot left and right, that's going to be a game changer with regards to the nature of worm based attacks. It's going to be interesting.
Ryan, before we wrap up the conversation, let's talk about some of the less sexy things that are going on with AI. You run a red team, and I know that there's administrivia in any job. Can you talk to me about how you're using AI behind the scenes to speed things up in reporting or in analysis so that we're more efficient inside the business?
Yeah, I think I want to hit on reporting, which is the first thing you mentioned, because it's everyone's least favorite part of hacking, right? Inevitably, a hacker, it can get giddy about their jobs. It's a 10-year-old kid's dream job to say, I'm a hacker for a living. And then all of a sudden, one day you find yourself, you know, 3 days into writing a report and going, oh my gosh, this is miserable. So everyone wants to try and eliminate or lessen the pain that it comes with the report writing and focus in on those really fun things like the EDR evasion, like the moving through a network and finding unique 0 days to help pivot, new attack techniques. That's what we want to focus on. So, how do we eliminate reporting? It was actually one of the first things we started working on here within our team when the AI boom occurred. We actually generated a tool that we call TARDIS. For those of you that appreciate sci-fi references, that's the Doctor Who vehicle. So TARDIS is the Tensor Automated Report Drafting Information System, and what that does is it chews on data that's provided to it throughout the event to help create that initial draft of report. It's doing so by chewing on raw logs created by users to help discern what the attack narrative is. It's also, taking and starting from known good starting points in previous reports for verbiage and kind of some canned verbiage that we keep around, and it's tweaking that based on what was found inside of a specific test event. So it's basically creating that good initial draft for an analyst to work through. So I think right after we fielded the latest version of TARDIS, one of my more senior analysts came up to me after he used it and said, that is the quickest I have ever written a report in my life, which I think is a glowing 5-star recommendation, 5 out of 4 star recommendations for the product doing its job. And by the way, the reports are amazing. I've been doing this for, 20 years, and I'm looking at some of the reports and they're top notch with much less effort. So it's definitely increasing efficiency for us and removing the pain points while still getting us. I think a report is one of the most, if not the most important part of the test process, right? At the end of the day, the client doesn't care about what cool techniques we use to pivot. They care about getting this digestible and comprehensible report. And I think we're doing a good job generating those with the assistance of AI in a more efficient manner.
I talked to Nirzik recently, and one of the things he said is, humans are going to have their role, AI is going to have its role. AI is going to be good at scaling things and going faster, and humans have to be good at doing the things that machines can't do. And report writing sounds like it's one of the things humans don't want to do. And I like that distinction of saying, let's give the machine some of the things we don't want to do. There's a great meme out there right now that says, why is AI getting to write songs and make art and I still have to do my laundry? And Ryan, you flip the script. You've given it the laundry task and you get to do the fun stuff. So that's awesome. So, as you just stated, humans are still a critical part of security. I'm curious how you see the role of the cybersecurity professional evolving. Maybe it's more soft skills, maybe it's net new skills, maybe it's folks that are traditionally not part of the cybersecurity community coming in. What do you see in that future landscape?
So I think AI is going to definitely have an impact in the OffSec industry will look different. Whether it be 6 months or it's, people always tell me, what do you think it's going to look like in 5 years? And I say, since the AI boom, I'm having trouble predicting what it's going to look like in 6 months. So I think there's definitely going to be a change. The ways that I can summarize that are two. One was is historically I take one tester and I put that tester on a specific event and say your job is to target Widget Inc. Incorporated. Go after them. And I think the day is coming where that's not going to be the paradigm. Instead, that one tester will instead be orchestrating and guiding as AI conducts 4 or 5 test events under their oversight. So I think there's definitely going to be enough increased efficiency to where one tester should be able to do the work of, say, 3 to 4 testers in the near future. I think that's coming. What does that look like? You said there's a human element, right? There's a very prominent tool inside the offensive security industry known as Bloodhounds, created by Spectre Ops. Bloodhounds looks at the mass amount of data inside of a domain. And from that, based on a certain set of rules, starts to create potential attack paths for you to gain increased privilege or proliferate throughout a domain, right? It takes this, massive data and creates these nice diagrams that are easy to digest. Also, they present really well to an executive audience to help them understand how a certain misconfiguration can lead to an inevitable compromise and further a kill chain. Okay, I think in the same way, AI will inevitably be able to assess what reconnaissance identifies inside of a network, create potential diagrams that then the human has to discern what is the safe vector or the vector to go after that most likely achieves the desired outcome. Maybe my outcome is I want to get caught, right? Because I want to exercise my blue team. Maybe I don't want to own the entire domain. I just want to get access to a very specific system and evade detection. And I think that AI is going to help us create those potential attack paths. But I think you're still going to need a human to do it, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we are doing in OffSec is using machines in a way they weren't intended to be used. And as a result, that's inherently dangerous. And you kind of do want a human in the middle making the conscious decision. Do I pull the trigger? Do I send this round down range? Because it may break something. So I see AI as helping to identify the attack paths in a more efficient manner, doing a lot of things to increase efficiency, but you still will want a human to assess that data and pull the trigger and move on an attack.
Ryan, I often joke that the AI that we often talk about is artificial intelligence, but the Unit 42 team is the actual intelligence team. And I like this idea that the future of OffSec coming out of your teams has actual intelligence applied to the power and scale and speed of artificial intelligence. That's it's a concern, but it's one that is lessened when there's responsible folks on on this side taking care of things. So I always like to ask, what's the most important thing a listener should remember from our conversation?
So I think the everything has this core foundation of the fact that we are definitely living in an AI boom. And I hit earlier on the fact that I can't picture what 6 months looks like, 6 months from now looks like. And in the same way, I can't picture what 5 years looks like. So I think we should just make our decisions, whether they be cybersecurity based, whether they be, design based, whatever you're doing in your organizations, you should be aware of the fact that this is a rapidly changing landscape. Also, we hit on here something, a key takeaway is the fact that there's an increased efficacy on my side as an ethical hacker, but at the same point in time, the adversary is also going to benefit from that same increased efficiency. So we're looking at a potentially more dangerous threat landscape. And so it's time to really pause and assess, have I done everything to do due diligence and preparation for a potential coming wave of more advanced cyber attacks. So have I deployed the right tooling? Have I done penetration tests from an independent authority to assess my network, right? Because at the end of the day, an AI driven, I use the theoretical AI driven worm, it's going to look for off the bat those top 10, 20 things that I'm going to look for as I'm moving through a network. And if it finds it, it's going to proliferate through. So have you done everything possible to try and identify that low hanging fruit and that allows for movement through your network? Have you done everything possible to try and increase detection so that your mean time to detection from a compromise is as quick as possible? Maybe even automated response. If you start seeing attack techniques, can your network respond accordingly? So I think the takeaway is you're in the middle of an AI boom, and you know, don't go back and concentrate on the same problems you've always had. Make sure you're spending time to look forward and think about the problems that are coming that theoretically could be, again, much more advanced.
Ryan, thanks for an awesome conversation today. I really appreciate your insights on AI, automation and OffSec, worms. I didn't expect us to get into that, and into deepfakes and so much more.
It's been a sincere pleasure. Thank you for having me, David. I appreciate the invite, and hopefully I was able to leave something of value for the listeners.
That's it for today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe wherever you listen and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews and feedback really do help us understand what you want to hear about. I want to thank our executive producer, Michael Heller, our content and production team, which include Kenny Miller, Joe Benacourt, and Virginia Tran. I added Threat Vector, and Elliot Peltzman mixes our audio. We'll be back next week. Until then, stay secure, stay vigilant. Goodbye for now.